Hello and welcome to episode 126 of Glitch Report. My name is GnittWitt. Thank you so much for stopping by, saying hi, kicking it with me today on the stream of dreams, the show of shows, and everything in between. You can find everything that I do over at my Linktree. That is linktree.com/GnittWitt, GnittWitt. I am on Twitch. I am on Instagram. I am on Threads. I am on TikTok. And I'm trying to post a little bit more on Blue Sky. There's some controversy surrounding Mark Zuckerberg's, kind of leadership among Facebook and, not believing in fact checking and all that stuff. And I'm not here to report on social media news, but it seems like some bad shit might be going on over. Hey, surprise, surprise, right? Like bad stuff is happening over at Facebook. Not to shock you with like breaking news. It's bad over at Facebook. Turns out it's not great. It's not great on Facebook. But you know what? We got a huge amount of news to get to. This is our first official podcast episode of 2025. We did do our Game of the Year episode. If you did not get a chance to listen to that, go ahead and do so. Maybe not now. We're kind of in the middle of something, so maybe hold off on checking out that Game of the Year podcast if you haven't done so already. But you're here, I'm here. We got a huge amount of news to get to. We're going to talk the games that I've been playing since last we spoke on the regular episode of the podcast. There is so much to get to. And I'm surprised because usually you think like, oh, January, pretty quiet year, right? People are checking their credit card bills and they're like, fuck me. And I'm maybe right there with them in some cases, but maybe not for the people over at the Stellar Blade Studio Shift Up. Let's get right into news right now. The folks over at Stellar Blade Studio Shift Up received a holiday bonus, end of the year bonus, whatever you want to call it, Christmas bonus, whatever you want to call it, whatever makes you feel good. And they got quite the bonus. They were gifted a PS5 Pro and $3.4 thousand as a end of year bonus following the success of the PS5 action game. Maybe a little bit of good news to get started. The company has about 300 employees at the company. Each employee received a bonus of 5 million won. That's about, I think, $3.4 thousand US. Speaking to the South Korean publication Naver, Naver. Listen, I'm not going to get any better at pronouncing stuff, but I will try nonetheless. A Shift Up representative said the bonuses were intended to encourage the existing talent at the company. Last summer, Shift Up achieved South Korea's largest initial public offering for a video game company in 3 years, raising 435 billion won. About $320 million. In its first day of trading, Shift Up said it planned to use the IPO proceeds to diversify its game portfolios. Shift Up was founded in 2013 by Hung Tae Kim, who remains as the company's largest holder after the listing. The company's second largest shareholder, perhaps you can guess. Who do you think? Okay, so South Korea, right? South Korea. The founder, Hung Tae Kim, is the largest shareholder of the company. Who do you think is the second? Who do you think? Now, if you're yelling at your phone or your computer, whatever you're listening to, if you're yelling to say it's Tencent, you're absolutely right. Second largest shareholder of Shift Up is Tencent. Now, for context, Stellar Blade was released for PlayStation 5 last year. Shift Up has claimed that the sales of the game have exceeded 1 million units worldwide. Now, they are also considering releasing the game for PC in 2025. They say, considering recent trends such as Steam's expanding market share in the AAA game sector and the global success of Black Myth Wukong, we expect the performance on PC to exceed that on consoles. And then last year, the South Korean company also confirmed it was exploring the possibilities of developing a Stellar Blade sequel. Stellar Blades, perhaps. And it was a little bit of good news to kick things off. I mean, it's, not too surprising. Stellar Blade was a successful game, maybe not the biggest game, kind of maybe overshadowed by Black Myth Wukong, even though they don't quite seem to be the same thing, the same game. But nonetheless, that's kind of what we're looking at over there over at Shift Up. Congratulations to the team on all of their recent success. Now, when I think about success, I think about a game called Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, which is now out for free as part of PlayStation Plus. You might be thinking to yourself, why do I pay for any tier of PlayStation Plus if they're going to give me a game that could not sell and was already given away as part of last year's Amazon Prime Day, promotion? But here we are. Now you can experience the magic for yourself, and you can level up your King Shark by shooting purple and pink, indistinguishable brainiac aliens till the cows come home. It's a great game. Unfortunately, not so great over at Rocksteady, which have now confirmed, not confirmed. Let me rephrase myself. Rocksteady have reportedly suffered more layoffs, with some programmers, artists, and QA staff at Rocksteady having been made redundant. That's according to Eurogamer. So I'm getting this news story from Video Games Chronicles. As always, shout out to Video Games Chronicles, but they're kind of pulling from Eurogamer here that says that they heard news from half a dozen impacted employees. The cuts reportedly took place at the end of last year, impacting some programmers, artists, and staff. It was reported last September that numerous Rocksteady employees had been made redundant over the previous month, including its QA department being more than halved from 33 to 15. And then for context, as the latest title from the studio behind the celebrated Batman Arkham franchise, Suicide Squad was once the industry's most highly anticipated games, but enthusiasm for it seemingly waned during a protracted development cycle, which included some underwhelming pre-release showings and a backlash to its live service elements. Following several delays, it was released last year in February to mixed critical reception. I think mixed critical reception is a little generous, and proved to be a commercial failure, with publisher Rocksteady owner Warner taking a $200 million loss on the game. Oh, yes, we should maybe talk about this later on. We'll take a break. I'll maybe, get some more news stories going, but news stories floating around about Call of Duty development costs, and we're maybe going to talk that in just a moment. They did confirm that last month, Suicide Squad's current season will be its last. They will receive no more updates. They've also included an offline mode. So that was one of the things about Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, right? Is it was whether you played it by yourself or with your friends, if you had friends that still wanted to be your friend after you roped them in to playing such a piece of shit game, you had to have an online connection. Doesn't matter if you were online, offline. Sorry, it doesn't matter if you were single player, multiplayer. You had to have an online connection. They then added additional content and story stuff later with, battle passes and all sorts of stuff. This is the last update for Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League from everything I can tell, because this is the last season. You can now play the game entirely offline if you would like. I will admit I have a family member who is a PS5 user, a PlayStation Plus user. They are often juggling what is important and what isn't when it comes to PlayStation 5 tiers, and they were not stoked about they were not stoked about Suicide Squad coming out for free. They also listen to this podcast, so they know that, like, hey, I don't like it. They were also over at my house, and I showed them Suicide Squad, and they were like, man, that's not, that doesn't work for me, brother. In their best Hulk Hogan impression. Long story short, this isn't surprising. I will say, if it's a lot of the work is being pulled from QA, keep in mind that, QA may not be as hard, and I'm not trying to play devil's advocate. I'm not trying to do this or that, but if they're pulling from the quality assurance department, that is a department where, they may not be ready to test and work on whatever Rocksteady's next game is, right? So in all fairness, that is a situation where they could potentially staff up in some areas once they got ready for their next game, assuming Warner Brothers doesn't just, shut the entire company down. I wish everybody at Rocksteady the best of luck. They have had an incredibly rough go at it, and it is incredibly obvious that this was not the game that they wanted to make. Though, as a reminder, in June, it was claimed that the studio was helping to develop an unannounced Hogwarts Legacy Director's Cut. Additional content for that game, maybe to be sold separately, maybe to be repackaged as a new bundle. I don't know what. If I had to guess, Hogwarts Legacy Director's Cut, if they did one, would probably be something that they sold for, $30-$40 or whatever. But that remains to be seen. Let's move on to other news stories. Damn it. It's another news story where layoffs have occurred. Splash Damage has confirmed layoffs as plans for their announced Transformers game now being canceled. The game cancellation means a number of Splash Damage roles are potentially at risk of redundancy. I gotta be honest, I'm gonna say this right now. I do not like the use of the word redundancy as it pertains to people losing their jobs. Their roles are not redundant. You and your management system are redundant. You do not have good work for these people to do because you have fucked things up along the way. The roles are not redundant. The people are not redundant. You do not have work for them to do because you have fucked things up from the top going down. Just going to make that clear before we get too ahead of ourselves here. So, they have canceled development on Transformers Reactive, which is supposed to be, I believe, some sort of first-person shooter. The London-based studio behind Gears Tactics, which is a cool game that I'm too stupid to play, Wolfenstein Enemy Territory, and Dirty Bomb announced the news on Wednesday in a Twitter post. Today, we have some very difficult news to share. The decision has been made to end development of Transformers Reactive. This means we will be scaling down to focus our efforts on other projects. Unfortunately, despite every effort, a number of roles across the studio are now potentially at risk of redundancy. Now, this game was announced for PC and consoles back in December of 2022. I believe this was a Game Awards showcase back in December of 2022. Transformers Reactive was set to be a 1 to 4 player co-op action game. Quote, "The decision did not come lightly and is a difficult time for the studio and our people. We want to take a moment to thank the team who worked on Transformers for their dedication and passion. Hasbro has been an incredibly supportive, was an incredible and supportive partner throughout, and we hope to work with them again. To the many fans, your excitement and support helped us going. While we're not being able to see the game through release is while not being able to see through the game to release is painful, having to say goodbye to friends and colleagues hurts even more. We're now focused on doing everything we can to support them through this tough period. Just so we're committed to caring for those who will stay with us as we build a stronger Splash Damage for the future." Now, this is going to come up, like, if you're a first time listener of the podcast and all that stuff, like, welcome. Thank you for being here. I'm just going to say this right now. There is a lot of terminology. There's a lot of cliches that exist in this podcast. I can't help it. I'm just calling it as I see it. One of those is, referring to people that you are firing as friends, which is total garbage. But the other one is Tencent, as we already mentioned. Tencent owns Splash Damage and announced in October of 2021 that it was working on an original science fiction IP. Drink every time that Tencent is mentioned, and try not to die in the process. This is kind of a business journalist running their mouth. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm not saying they're right. This is less of a, facts based news story and more a business journalist and analyst kind of talking their shit, saying that Xbox games in Game Pass can lose 80% of its premium sales. That's according to business journalist Christopher Dring, use the full name, who added that for multi-platform titles, inclusion in Game Pass can actually drive PS5 sales. Now, they were speaking as part of a Q&A on the install base forums. Dring was asked his thoughts about Game Pass and its impact on the market. Quote, "Anecdotally, games that are in Game Pass can expect to lose around 80% of its expected premium sales on Xbox." And that's the figure that gets thrown around. It's less if it's a big mainstream release, But generally, look at how low Hellblade 2 charted, or where Indiana Jones came, or even Starfield. Game Pass clearly hurt sales for those titles on Xbox. But if it's a game on multiple platforms, it can be beneficial. That surge in players on one Xbox can have a strong impact on sales on PlayStation, for instance. Dring went on to say that he feels torn on the effectiveness of subscription models, and it's highly dependent on the genre and game type. Try being an indie game on Xbox right now that's not on Game Pass. But also, getting people to play your game in 2024, 2025 is so hard, and subscriptions gets games in front of lots of people, he continued. We know from data there are a lot of people that only play Call of Duty, and if some of those players decided to get Call of Duty this year via Game Pass, those are very same people who took the opportunity to play some other Game Pass games they wouldn't have played otherwise. It's hard to argue that it's a bad thing. This week's sales data revealed that video games revenue in the UK dropped 4.4% to 4.6 billion euros in 2024. This was driven mainly by the collapse in physical game revenue in the region, with just 324.4 million euros generated by sales of boxed games in the UK last year. That's a drop of nearly 35% over 2023. Now, I'm going to say this. I am trying to be better about not talking as much about sales data and numbers when it feels unnecessary, but I think this is something to point out in terms of like Xbox subscription equals sales, yes or no, and whatnot. I'm going to say this. I'm going to say a couple things about what Chris Dring had to say. If we were to make assumptions about the people that play Call of Duty and the people that buy a new Call of Duty every year and play Call of Duty every year, there are potentially people that play Call of Duty all year. And I have a hard time imagining, just being honest, I have a hard time imagining that the people that play Call of Duty are also the same people that would be willing to give something like Hellblade 2 a shot, even if they had it on Game Pass, which they do. That is something I will say. I'll also say that, yes, I can imagine for indies trying to sell games on Xbox. I mean, this has kind of been the story for a while, is that like Game Pass is not just a potential snake that eats its own tail in terms of Microsoft made, Xbox owned and developed games, but also people look at a game, and the PlayStation Plus is the same way. Like, don't think for a moment that this isn't happening to some extent on PlayStation Plus. But people look at Game Pass and they look at an indie game and they're like, well, why isn't this game on Game Pass? Like, I'm not going to play, I'm not going to pay $20-$30 for, an indie game. I don't want to buy Squirrel with a Gun, when they put a game like Goat Simulator out on Game Pass. Like, I don't want to do that. So, yes, the idea of getting games in front of people in 2024, 2025 is very hard. There are so many games coming out every single day. It is January 8th at the time of this recording, and I can only imagine that there are probably hundreds of games that have come out. Well, maybe not hundreds, but there have been probably a boatload of games that have come out just within this first week of January. So, the fight for mindshare, the fight for not even digital shelf space, but just word of mouth is nearly impossible. In this day and age. You need some form of curation on these digital storefronts like Steam, like Xbox, like PlayStation, like Nintendo. But you also need that positive word of mouth, because it's one thing to find your game on that shelf space, on the PlayStation Store. It's another to be like, oh, I've heard of this game. Someone talked about this game and I know about this game. So I kind of see where Chris is going for. I will just mention that I don't know if this is necessarily 100% exclusive, to Xbox Game Pass. Now, speaking of indie games, former Annapurna staff, if you remember, the folks over at Annapurna Interactive left the company and are reportedly taking over the Private Division portfolio. This is probably the best scenario for all involved because, as you know, Take-Two, the company that owns Rockstar and 2K, they shut down Private Division some time ago. that they had sold. Actually, excuse me, let me rephrase. Take-Two announced in November that they had sold Private Division. They had sold it to a buyer called Havali Investments, a private equity firm based in Austin, Texas. The publication Bloomberg claims that Havali intends to launch a new company that will publish Private Division games, including Tales of the Shire in March, the Kerbal Space Program series, and an unannounced title from Pokemon game developer Game Freak. The company will reportedly be staffed by the former employees of the indie game publisher Annapurna Interactive, who was signed en masse last summer following dispute with the group's owner, Megan Ellison. Now, Private Division employed around 20 staff when it was acquired by Havali, some of whom will be laid off as part of plans, it's being claimed. And I also don't quite know how many people were part of the Annapurna walkout. Do I have a number? Can I get a number? Can I buy a number? It was 25 staff. So it was 25 staff. So about 20 staff from Private Division, 25 staff from Annapurna. I could definitely see a scenario where they're trying to get that number closer to about 20. I'm not saying that like you can expect half those people to lose their jobs or something like that. But, 2025, for considering the great work that Annapurna was doing and to an extent Private Division was doing, I could see a scenario where like this private equity company is like, hey, we're going to work with what we were attracted to originally, which is that 20-ish number of people. For context, Private Division was established in 2017. It published such games as Ancestors, The Humankind Odyssey, Obsidian's The Outer Worlds, Piccolo Studios' After Us, and Penny's Big Breakaway, just to name a few. Private Division announced in May of 2023 that it had signed a new action game from Game Freak codenamed Project Bloom, which was expected to be released during Take-Two's fiscal year ending in March 2026. So that's still a ways away. But, I'm not always super stoked about the idea of private equity getting involved because they are going to squeeze it's business, it's capitalism, baby, but still. So far, so good from what we're hearing, though I hope that everybody involved can land on their feet in some way, shape, or form, even if that means that some roles will be kind of duplicated and thus maybe cut as part of, combining Private Division with Annapurna. I don't talk a lot about this game, but it is one of the biggest games, and you might, out there today, and you might even argue that it's one of Microsoft's biggest games. I don't think there's something to argue about. I think it's damn true. But Minecraft, one of the biggest games out there, no doubt about it. Now, for context, Microsoft did not originally develop and make Minecraft. It was made originally by Marcus Notch Pearson, who is the original creator of Minecraft. For context, we're just going to keep referring to him as Notch, but Notch would then go on to sell Minecraft to and Minecraft and the developer that he founded, Mojang, to Microsoft in 2014 for $2.5 billion. That's with a B. In 2014, Minecraft was a big deal. It is still a big deal 10 years later. But more than that, Mojang Mojang, the developer, and Minecraft, valued at $2.5 million. I can only imagine that Notch got a significant chunk of that money. And as a result, he's been pretty quiet since then, though he seems to have some really shitty political takes, among other things. But over on Twitch, Notch suggested that he could spend the next year working on a spiritual successor to his blockbuster sandbox game. For context, let me see if I can pull this up here. He says, I basically announced Minecraft 2. I don't think he can call it Minecraft 2 anymore because he doesn't own Minecraft, but whatever, that maybe people actually do want me to make another game that's super similar to the first one, and I'm loving working on games again. I don't super duper care exactly which game I make first, or even if I make more, but I do know I'm making one, so I figured I'd absolutely be willing to give it an honest shot in the form of a spiritual successor to Minecraft and put up a poll about it. My intentions are clear and honest about it, saying that spiritual successors are usually kind of, washed up, tragic, the things I'm fearing my next game is going to be anyway, and try to push myself to avoid it. So why not do the thing that people do want and are willing to give me somehow even more cash for? I intend for the money to be spent for good, and my God, have I learned I fail a lot. Winning is failing until you make yourself succeed. He's kind of rambling, but it's fine. Oh, and I also very much value being a man of my words, so I also intend to do this in a way that is in no way tried to sneakily infringe on the incredible work the Mojang team is doing and that Microsoft is successfully doing with the... Oh, well, he's just taking a shit on Microsoft. Okay, well, that's fine. And I respect them for doing that. It's their job, and they, from what I understand, let the studio do things their way, which seems very fair to me. Anyways, Notch seems to shit on Microsoft and announce a game called Minecraft, not a game called Minecraft 2. Anyways, cool. Hey, maybe we'll get another Minecraft sort of game. You never know. Helldivers 2, the director over at Arrowhead, is already planning their next game. Arrowhead wants to actually hear from fans on what a Helldivers 2 follow-up could be. The creative director posted to Twitter saying, with 10 minutes to 2025, what are your expectations and desires for what the next Arrowhead game will be? I am working on the high concept of what I would love to hear your speculation. Since its release and breakout success last year, Arrowhead has continued to update the Sony-published Helldivers 2, and the creative director has even suggested that it'll work on the game until it effectively becomes Helldivers 3. Which, I'm going to say this right now, we have seen this with both Overwatch 2 as well as Counter-Strike Go turning into Counter-Strike 2. I usually don't like it when they say we're going to keep working on a game until it becomes the sequel, because usually those games do not tend to have the big sweeping changes or significant jump in content and quality and all of that stuff that a true sequel would have. A great example being that when Overwatch 2 came out, people did not fucking like Overwatch 2 because it ruined a lot of what people liked about Overwatch 1, and it took away their ability to play Overwatch 1 in the first place. I am not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that that is what they're going to do with Helldivers 2 or Helldivers 3, but you know what would be probably better than just turning Helldivers 2 into Helldivers 3? Just making Helldivers 3. Just make Helldivers 3 have a light, thin skeleton crew of people, maybe keeping Helldivers 2 up to date as they work on Helldivers 3, but I just don't think turning Helldivers 2 into Helldivers 3 is the way to go, but hey, what do I know? Man, we got a lot of news. We got a lot of news. I'm gonna cut this news story for the time being. Sega, your friends and mine over at Sega, they are the Sonic the Hedgehog people, if you don't know. Sega says that it is weighing up launching its own game subscription service. They want to potentially get into the world of game subscription services, and you might think, why would they do this? Why? Are we not, subscription service out the ass enough as it is? And I'm not saying we aren't, but I will say this. Netflix has seen some success in offering video games as part of their subscription service. Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo all have their own subscription service. We already talked about today Amazon Prime Amazon Prime offering games as part of their subscription service. There have been some successful game services that happen to, focus on monthly subscriptions. That being said, Sega America and Europe CEO Suji Utsumi, told the BBC such subscription services were very interesting and that Sega was evaluating some opportunities. Quote, we're thinking something and discussing something we cannot disclose right now. Now, for context, Sega is currently working on new entries in the Jet Set Radio series, Streets of Rage, Golden Axe, Shinobi, Crazy Taxi, and Virtua Fighter. Sega are also the people that put out the Yakuza, Like a Dragon games, and the Persona games. They're also the Total War games. And Sega is, how would I put this? I think in its current state, Sega is a little too broad to offer a subscription service. And I'll tell you why. Because I might pick at a Sega game once a year, maybe, right? One Sega game a year, maybe. Virtua Fighter looks cool. Oh, I'm going to check out the latest Yakuza game, whatever, right? Notice I didn't say Sonic the Hedgehog because I don't want to play a fucking Sonic the Hedgehog game in 2025 or any other year going forward, but hey, that's just me. But I'll tell you the other thing I don't want to do. I also don't want to go back and play a bunch of old Sega games. I just, I have a cap on how old of a Sega game I really want to get into because, to be honest, I would rather focus on older games that I maybe missed out on or replayed that are, within the last 10, 15 years compared to a 30-year-old, Golden Axe game. But that's just me. Well, actually, no, probably closer to like 40-year-old Golden Axe game at this point. But, Total War games are like these hardcore strategy games, right? Like that's not going to appeal to people who just want to play Crazy Taxi. That's not going to necessarily appeal to people who want to play Yakuza and Persona. So on top of there being too many gaming subscription services as it is, and I say that as someone who's happy with, for the most part, with what is available, I don't think that Sega has any business getting in the market of subscription services. I think it would flop. I think it would fail. And I think Yakuza. I think Sega would probably go right back to finding new ways to package 50 classic Sega games in one to sell you the same video game over and over again for the end of time because they couldn't trick you into paying $10 a month to play Sonic 1. Though they do claim that we're not a retro company, we really appreciate our legacy, we value it, but at the same time, we want to deliver something new, otherwise we'll become history, and that's not what we're aiming for. I think Sega's doing fine. I think they, want to make as much money as possible as part of the capitalistic world that we live in. That's not me to tell you that it's bad in one way, shape, or form, but damn, like, Sega put out two of the best games of last year. They put out two of the biggest games of last year in Metaphor ReFantazio and Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. They also put out a Sonic game. Like, they're doing okay. 3 big games a year from a publisher that's AAA. Some people would kill for that. You think Ubisoft isn't looking at Sega being like, motherfucker, you put out a Sonic the Hedgehog game and people were happy about it? I mean, not me, but... and on top of that, 2 critically acclaimed huge role-playing games. Like, I'm going to be honest, I think Sega's doing just fine and they do not need a subscription service at all. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we got some more news to get to. Stick around. We ain't going anywhere. Welcome back to the podcast. I continue to be GnittWitt, and we're going to continue to talk about the news. This news story came out. It's a short one, but it's an interesting one. Because we don't often get this sort of insight into what games, cost, right? We have some ideas. Warner Brothers lost $200 million on Suicide Squad, right? But how much did it actually cost? Now, in this instance, I don't actually have details surrounding what Suicide Squad cost, but I do have an idea of how much it cost to make Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. Now, one thing I just want to say before we get into this is factoring in the additional content that they made for the game as well. So that is the additional levels that they made for multiplayer and zombies, and also, how much it cost to make, the battle passes, the skins, all the stuff that you buy for the game. And that number is about $700 million just for Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. Now, this was first reported by GameFile, a court filing submitted by Activision as part of a lawsuit regarding the 2022 shooting at Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas. I don't know what are they trying to blame Call of Duty on a school shooting? I don't know. I could not tell you. But it included official word on the development budgets of 2015's Black Ops 3, 2019's Modern Warfare, and 2020's Black Ops Cold War. Which is quite something. I have all the numbers here in a moment. But Black Ops 3 in 2015 cost about $450 million to make in development costs across its entire life cycle, and it sold about 43 million copies. Modern Warfare 2019 cost about $640 million to make across its life cycle, and it sold about 41 million copies. Black Ops Cold War 2020, $700 million in development costs across its entire life cycle, and it sold around 30 million copies. Now, for context, Naughty Dog's The Last of Us Part 2 cost around $220 million. Guerrilla's Horizon Forbidden West, that's the sequel to Zero Dawn, cost $212 million, and Insomniac's Spider-Man 3 cost $300 million to make. Now, you might be thinking, well, why is Black Ops Cold War double the cost? Because they spent an additional year developing content for Black Ops Cold War after it came out. You know, they were making new levels. They were, for multiplayer, new zombie modes and this and that. They were working on that game for a significant chunk of time. And they knew that they were going to be selling additional content to make up for the money that was being spent. I don't know how much of a profit they made. I don't know if they broke even. Like, I don't know, the sales around how much raw money Black Ops Cold War made. But you can see a scenario where if they're going to continue to develop the game, it could cost potentially double what something like Spider-Man 2 cost, which is a game that they did not sell additional DLC for, but are putting out on PC. I don't know why I just turned and looked at my PC. I was going to slap it or something. Be like, hey, you'll be able to play Spider-Man 2 in no time, buddy. But they're putting that out on PC later in January. Now, GameFile does note that these development costs do not include marketing spend, which will be a significant thing for Call of Duty as it continues to operate on a live service model. So, if you do some fuzzy math, Black Ops Cold War's 30 million copies sold just on its own. Just some fuzzy math. Follow me here. 30 million copies sold means that it probably generated over $1 billion in revenue for Activision. So they made a minimum $300 million profit-ish, but that does not factor in all the skins, all the DLC, all the stuff that they sold for the game. You can tell that even with the marketing, even if it costs them, so that's not factoring in marketing. Let's say they spent, I don't know, 300 million on marketing. I don't know how much you spent on marketing. I don't know. I don't know, but there's a good chance that Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War was still an incredibly profitable game for Activision, even when you factor in the $700 million spent on development alone and marketing, which is why Microsoft spent $69 billion just to buy the company. Let's move on. We got more news stories. I hope you don't like Dead Space because you're not going to get any more, which isn't that big of a surprise, but hey, let's just say it now anyways. According to the former developers of Dead Space, EA is not interested in making any more Dead Space games. Now last year's remake, this is a new story from, this is an older news story from last year's game. 2023's Dead Space proved to be a critical hit, reviving the beloved space horror series after it had been left fallow for 10 years. However, despite being January 2023's second biggest selling game behind Modern Warfare 2, this seemingly wasn't enough to satisfy EA, and it was reported in April that the studio had shelved a remake of Dead Space 2, though EA denied that one had ever been in works. We've now found out that an attempt by the original creators to pitch a Dead Space 4 this year, in 2024, was rejected by EA. So, just for timeline, they remade Dead Space 1. They had reportedly shelved a remake of Dead Space 2. EA denied that one had ever been in the works. Then the original creators, the people who went on to make the Callisto Protocol, came back and tried to pitch EA on a Dead Space 4, and EA said no. In a recent interview with three members of the original Dead Space team, Glenn Schofield, Christopher Stone, and Brett Robbins, about the franchise, during which it was revealed that earlier this year, 2024, the trio wanted to pitch a fourth entry in the space-based scare 'em up to EA, but it seems there wasn't even room to try. Let's see what they said. They said, "We're not interested right now. We appreciate it, blah, blah, blah. We respect their opinion. They know their numbers and what they have to ship. The industry's in a weird place right now. People are really hesitant to take chances on those things." And that's it. So, hey, guess what? You don't have to, if you haven't played Dead Space yet, don't worry. You don't have to wait for a sequel, so you can play it whenever the hell you want. But I would hope that it doesn't take another 10 years for EA to make another Dead Space game, because Dead Space Remake was a great game. This is the last news story I have, the last official news story I have. I guess I could always go dig in for more news stories, but this is a interesting one. This is a conversation. This is kind of a not really a conversation, but this is a comment that Fallout co-creator Tim Kaine made in regards to RPGs, AAA RPGs, and violence, which I think is kind of interesting. Amazon is currently filming, or is beginning its filming for season 2 of Fallout. Original Fallout co-creator Tim Kaine has opened up on why he thinks violence sells when it comes to AAA games, particularly RPGs. Over the new year, Tim Kaine posted a video to YouTube about why so many AAA RPGs expect and often require the player to do combat, and discussed whether or not games treat violence as the default. Got a couple quotes here. Let me kind of dig through these quotes here. Long story short, companies make games and in general products that people will buy, and people will buy stuff with violence, but he kind of goes a little bit further. It means games that sell the most, and I'm not even talking about review the best, just sell the most will dictate future games, right? The best games are not always the games that dictate the future, unfortunately. He says, this is obvious. If you have any company and it's trying to make money, and there's one game that sells millions of copies and another one that sells 100,000, which one are you going to try? Which one are you going to do if they both take just as much time and money to develop? This is why I tell people to vote with their dollars. Action genres tend to sell very well, and by that I mean action RPGs kind of outsell classic RPGs, even if both of them are violent, he added. It's also easier to market those sorts of games when you watch a trailer and you see people actually doing things, jumping, climbing, shooting, punching. It looks like, whoa, look at all those things you can do in that game. It's hard to show the other things. How do we show that this game has a really good story? How do we show that it has fantastic dialogue? How do you do that in a trailer that may only be 15 or 30 seconds long? You have to reduce this wonderful narrative that's super creative and nuanced and that has a huge arc down to a soundbite. And guess what? It's because most people won't watch more than a few seconds of something. So let me try to maybe cover a little bit more of this for a moment. Video games are a unique, I've talked about this before, I'll say it again. Video games are a unique art form in which the main selling point of a game and the main unique component of a game that separates it from music, television, movies, books, is its interactivity. And interactivity by default requires some amount of action. And I don't mean action in the traditional sense of like guns blazing. You need to do stuff in a game. Okay, so let's break this down. You need some sort of action to make a game interactive, right? If you are going to make a narrative-based game and you're not going to try to make a, puzzle game like Tetris, you will need some sort of conflict in order to create that action. At the end of the day, one of the most simple and basic forms of conflict is something that involves some level of violence in order to create that action. Listen, you can always try to make a game that doesn't involve, combat and does involve, or it doesn't involve combat, but does involve some sort of narrative story. And there's a good chance that you will probably slip into some amount of violence in some way, shape, or form. I'll give you a great example. Cozy games. There's a genre of games out there, cozy games. These are games that tend to be a little more adventure gamey. Those are games that tend to be a little more peaceful, a little bit more quiet, a little bit more low key. And they tend to be games that don't often feature a lot of violence. People refer to Stardew Valley as a cozy game. Now, I'm not saying that all cozy games by default do not have violence in them, but you would be lying to yourself if you said that not all of them have at least some element of violence to them. So let's pick on Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley is a game in which you farm crops and you fish and you go mining and you sell stuff and you make goods and you live off the land and you make friends in town, and it's sort of a farming RPG simulator type game. And it is a game that 100% features violence. You don't think of it as a violent game. You don't think of it as a combat focused game, but if you go into the Stardew Valley mines in the game and you are mining for ore and minerals and material, there are monsters in that environment that will try to kill you, and you have to swing your sword and weapons to kill them before they kill you. It is not a default to the game. In fact, you could probably spend a large portion of Stardew Valley never touching any of the combat whatsoever, but it is inevitable to an extent in Stardew Valley if you're looking to try to wring out everything that the game has to offer. Now, there are other games that feature no combat. I think about a game like Dredge. Dredge does not feature any combat whatsoever, from what I have played so far. Anyways, I could be wrong. Disney Dreamlight Valley, from everything I can tell, does not feature combat. And then there are, but that's not an excessive, like I'm sort of getting down the road of not the games that he's talking about. Like when you think about a game like Fallout, you think about a game like Hitman or Indiana Jones. You think about Skyrim. You think about The Outer Worlds. You think about all these other, games that feature violence as the default. And I'm not trying to, make up for potentially a lack of imagination when it comes to potential tools for problem solving in games, but like these games need some sort of action, and violence is the easiest way to produce action. Unfortunately, it's also the most marketable way to present and sell action as well. He's not wrong. And if you want to, spend your hard-earned money on games that do not promote or encourage or default to violence, go ahead. But you're going to have a really bad time firing up Fallout 4 and trying not to kill anybody. In fact, I would argue that you'd have a pretty hard time firing up the original Fallout that Tim Kaine created himself. I'm not calling him a hypocrite, by no means. But you would have a hard time getting through the original Fallout that Tim Kaine created without killing anyone or anything in the first place. Like literally the first thing you do in that game in combat wise is you fight a bunch of rats. Now, are they people? Are they whatever? I'll leave it up to you. But without a doubt, there is violence even in something like Fallout. So I think that's going to do it for the news. I don't know if I can think of anything else off the top of my head. We'll scroll through just a moment if you don't mind giving me a moment of your time. We'll scroll through, see what else is kind of sticking out there. There's a lot of leaks. There's a lot of leaks going around as it pertains to the Nintendo Switch 2. That announcement is probably going to happen very, very soon. I wouldn't be surprised if it happens later this month. And when I talk about leaks, I'm like the dock. There's images of the new dock. There's images of the Joy-Cons. There's images of the shell. They're showing off some footage of WWE 2K25. More details surrounding WWE 2K25 are going to be coming out later this month. They revealed the NVIDIA RTX 5090. Those are the new graphics cards. Actually, we'll maybe cover this for a moment, just, a little bit about me while we're here. I am in the world of PC gaming, and I recognize that PC gaming can be incredibly expensive and can easily double the cost of console gaming. For example, in my PC, I have a GeForce. It's an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3090 Ti. This is a graphics card that I paid about $1,400 for about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, for this card. And that's Canadian pricing, right? And I'm going to take this graphics card to the grave if I can because of how much it costs. I think it's a good graphics card. I have some small issues with it, but I think it's a good graphics card. The two biggest components when it comes to building a gaming PC or using a gaming PC are your processor and your graphics card. So I have about a $1,500 graphics card just in my PC alone. You can imagine how fucking expensive the rest of this thing is. That's not me bragging. That's not me doing anything like that. Please, 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 please don't make it think like, oh, I'm some big baller over here. I'm not. And the reason why I'm not a big baller when it comes to PC gaming is because I looked at the cost of the new NVIDIA RTX 5090. That is the top of the line graphics card for gaming as of right now, unless other company makes a better one. And that RTX 5090 graphics card is $2,000 US. Now, in fairness, the second tier card, the 5080 is half the price at $1,000 American, but still, nonetheless, goddamn, that is some expensive graphics cards, and it's just a reminder that I will probably take my graphics card to the grave and use it until it catches on fire and smokes, and I don't know what else. And the other thing is, I think they're confirming that HBO The Last of Us Season 2 is coming out in April. For those looking forward to that. Resident Evil 4 Remake is by far the series' fastest selling game, having achieved a new milestone. It has now sold 9 million sales worldwide. Oh, and if you watched Wrestle Dynasty, New Japan Pro Wrestling's Wrestle Dynasty event, you may have noticed some Final Fantasy sounding music, and that's because Kenny Omega debuted new music from Nobuo Uematsu, who is the composer of Final Fantasy 14 and 16. So if you're like, man, that sounds like some Final Fantasy ass music that Kenny Omega came out to, that's because they made Final Fantasy sounding music for Kenny Omega. Speaking of Final Fantasy, let's talk about the games that I've been playing. I've been actually playing a lot of Final Fantasy as of late. So over the break where I, did my Game of the Year podcast, I played through and completed Final Fantasy VII. That is the original Final Fantasy VII. A friend of mine bought me a pre-order on Steam, gifted me a pre-order copy of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on Steam that's coming out later this month. So I thought to myself, you know what? I played through the Final Fantasy VII Remake game. I enjoyed it, warts and all. There's not a lot of warts, but there were some. Warts and all, I'm still waiting for, 7 Rebirth, part 2 of the remake to come out. Let's go ahead and play through Final Fantasy VII. And I'm two minds of Final Fantasy VII. I'm two minds of it. The first thing I'll say is that I played through that game with features that were not in the original game. So I played the Windows 7, the Windows Store version of Final Fantasy VII. And it featured a couple of things that were not in the original game. It featured a 3x speed boost for just maneuvering through the entire game. It featured basically a infinite health and infinite super meter, the limit breaker abilities. And it also featured the option for skipping random encounters in battle. Now, let me just explain. If you've never played Final Fantasy VII or other games like it. In Final Fantasy VII, there are times when you're going to be running around in town and inside environments that are kind of like these corridored, sectioned off environments. In those environments, you may be running and wandering around, and you will just trigger a random battle in the environment. It is a turn-based game, right? There are times where you will be in the larger overworld, running from town to town, city to city, covering this massive open world in Final Fantasy VII, and you may still come across random battle encounters. In the original Final Fantasy game, if you had a battle, you would either have to run or fight. You could not avoid it. Compare that to more recent games like Metaphor or Persona, or even something like South Park Stick of Truth, where you see the enemies in the environment and you can either choose to engage them or not. In Final Fantasy VII, you're just walking, trigger the battle, that's it, fight's on, right? And you can either fight it or run away. In this updated version of Final Fantasy VII, you can turn off the random encounters entirely. So there were a couple of times when I would run through the game with the 3x speed boost on, just ignoring all of the combat or a majority of the combat random encounters, and I would just turn it off once I got into the story mode so I could fight the enemies in the story area and stuff like that. But there were also times when I used the 3x speed boost to just burn through combat encounter after combat encounter, just like grinding out my character, leveling up like crazy, combat after combat after combat after combat, leveling up the character. And while I think, like the core of what's there in Final Fantasy VII is got a little bit of full filler, it's a little bit fluffy, there's maybe a little too much going on in some cases in terms of filler. I think overall it's still a decent game. I have a lot of nostalgia for the game, and I will admit that right here, right now, that there is nostalgia is a hell of a drug, and I definitely have nostalgic feelings for Final Fantasy VII. And while I don't think it has aged like a fine wine necessarily, the inclusion of some of those cheats in the game does make it a lot easier. Would I recommend Final Fantasy VII for first-time Final Fantasy VII players? No, you're probably better off playing that remake, without a doubt. But I did play through that. It didn't take me very long, and I enjoyed it for the most part. And I think I still have it installed because there is still things you can do in the game after you have beaten it. However, it's a scenario where a lot of the side quests you can't access if you've beaten the game. So basically you just load your last save and then carry on if that is your thing. But wait, there's more. Speaking of Final Fantasy, I have also gone back to Final Fantasy 16, a game that came out on PC in 2024, a game that I did not get the chance to finish and have tried to go back to. And what I've realized is that Final Fantasy 16 is a game that seems to have an incredible opening if you've played through the demo, and actually does pretty good after the demo is over. But the middle parts of Final Fantasy 16 are just so fluffy, filler, and boring. It's really tough to recommend that game. I'm still going to play through it, and I've committed myself to beating Final Fantasy 16. In fact, if I can say this on air, I would like to finish Final Fantasy 16 before Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth comes out. We'll see, because I'm about halfway done Final Fantasy 16. But I feel like the story is just so full of filler and fluff. It often feels like side quests that are so inconsequential are shoved into the story mode just to extend things a little bit longer. So if you cut, I don't know, even a third of some of the filler in Final Fantasy 16, I feel like you'd have a much better game, because once that story picks back up and you're seeing these crazy cutscenes and huge boss battles and shit's blowing up and, you know, magic spells and phoenixes and big demon fighting stuff, like that stuff continues to be incredibly awesome. It continues to look gorgeous. And I think the combat continues to be fun. You get a lot of abilities as Clive that make combat really snappy and really fun. It's just a scenario where you are often doing like missing persons cases and running around for what feels like no real purpose until the story decides, okay, it's time to move from this location to this other kingdom to do this, to do that. And it just falls a little bit flat as a result. But I would like to finish it, and hopefully I can finish it before Final Fantasy VII Rebirth comes out. I'm just pulling up Steam right now because I don't know when Rebirth comes out. I'm going to guess and say that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth comes out in on the 23rd. That is my guess. What do you think, dear listener? Do you think I'm right? No, that's Intergrade. Yes, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth comes out on the 23rd. For context, I put about 33 hours into Final Fantasy VII Remake. I will admit that I kind of pushed through a lot of stuff in that game. I kind of sped through a lot of stuff in that game as a result. They've also done some updates to the game as part of this, which is neat. But anyways, man, they were continuing to update that game even last year. Interesting. Cool. Anyways, January 23rd for the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth coming to PC. Very much looking forward to that game. And the other game that I've been playing is Fallout New Vegas. If you have been following me on Twitch or on YouTube, you will know that on Friday mornings, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, I am continuing to replay Fallout New Vegas. It is New Year, New Vegas, and I had a New Year's resolution. I wanted to replay some great games, some of my favorite games, and some games that I have not finished. Fallout New Vegas is probably still my favorite Fallout game, despite there being huge gameplay improvements and changes over in Fallout 4. I still really like Fallout New Vegas. I love the writing. I love the world of New Vegas and post-apocalyptic Las Vegas and all that stuff. And you can find it over on YouTube, where I think up to part 4 over on YouTube, and I will be playing through part 5 of my playthrough live on Twitch on Friday mornings, this Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Well, I think for next week, what we're going to do, I don't know how much news there's going to be next week, but I think for next week, maybe we'll take a look at some 2025 games, get an idea of what to expect, what to be excited for, what we're anticipating. Maybe we'll recover some of my thoughts on most anticipated. But I will say right now, I did not love, end result, I did not love my Game of the Year podcast. I felt that it was forced. It felt like something I didn't really enjoy doing, even in the moment. And when I looked back on it, I was just like, man, like, I know this is my opinion. I know it's not that serious. It's just fucking video games, but damn, why am I so down on this? And I think it's because I have realized I may not actually enjoy putting stuff into boxes and categories and stuff the way that I did it last year. I think in 2023 it was a little bit more successful. I think I'd also played through more games last year that were 2023 games. But I'm noticing that, like, there are a lot of games that I want to play this year that are not actually 2025 games. For example, Spider-Man 2, The Last of Us Part 2, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth are all games that did not come out natively in 2025. And I want to talk about those games. I want to play those games. So if those games end up making a favorite games list this year, even though they're not technically 2025 games, do not take it as me disparaging games that came out in 2025. These are just the games I got the chance to play. These are the games that technically did release in a form in 2025, even if they're not technically quote unquote 2025 games. So maybe we'll talk more about plans for game of the year and things like that next time we are together. And we'll also cover maybe games to be excited about and anticipating for 2025. But until then, I'm going to be playing a lot of Fallout New Vegas. I'm going to be playing a lot of Final Fantasy 16. Maybe I'll pick at some other old games and I'll tell you all about it on the podcast. That is going to do it for Glitch Report. I have been GnittWitt. You can find everything that I do over at my Linktree. That is linktree.com/GnittWitt, GnittWitt. I am on Twitch. I am on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, Blue Sky, YouTube, and make sure to check out the podcast if you haven't done so, which is weird because you're listening to it, but it is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. All right. I've been GnittWitt. We will see you next time. Happy gaming. Take it easy.